Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Morrison. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at the Scarborough Public Library, and I want you thank you very much for joining us for this evening's author talk. If you haven't heard, we do have some big news that the library building will be reopening on Monday, March 1st, so this upcoming Monday. So we have been doing curbside for a couple of months, but now that the COVID-19 cases are going back down, we're ready to reopen again. So we hope to see some of you in person soon. Tonight, our presenter is going to give a talk, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers at the end of the talk. So please chat your questions in the chat box rather than using the Q&A, and chat your questions to everyone so that everyone can see your question and people don't repeat the same questions. So we're very pleased to welcome Elizabeth G. Macalaster, author of War Pigeons, Winged Couriers in the U.S. Military, 1878 to 1957. The book was published by McFarland in 2020 and is the first complete account of the remarkable service that homing pigeons provided for the American Armed Forces, from its fledgling beginnings after the Civil War to the bird's invaluable role in communications in every branch of the U.S. military through both World Wars and beyond. Elizabeth started her career as a marine biologist, studying deep water North Atlantic octopus before turning to science journalism and working for the Department of the Interior and the EPA on water quality issues. She now writes science and history articles for magazines and newspapers and is the author of Reckoning at Heart's Pass, an adventure thriller novel in which homing pigeons play a covert role, and the YA book, In Disguise, Undercover with Real Women Spies, which she wrote under the pen name Ryan Ann Hunter in collaboration with Pamela D. Greenwood. And we're very pleased that she's joined us in Scarborough this evening. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. And many thanks to Lucy Jackson Norville and Catherine Morrison and the Scarborough Library for hosting authors like me via Zoom so we can continue to share our stories during this pandemic. I wrote War Pigeons, Winged Couriers in the U.S. Military, 1878 to 1957, for one reason: to move people to take a second look at the most extraordinary bird on our planet. Homing pigeons are rock doves, the same species of pigeon that perches on rooftops and wanders around parks cleaning up after us. But homers are a very special breed of rock dove. They are strong, fast, intelligent athletes, and for 3/4 of a century, they were the U.S. military's most reliable means of communication. Since I won't be coming back to this slide until the very end, I wanted to mention the bird you see, Peerless Pilot. He was one of the Navy's best couriers in World War I. And in 1 year alone, at only 15 months old, he flew 200 missions from planes, doing scouting runs out over the Atlantic Ocean back to his base at Pauillac on the coast of France. Peerless Pilot exemplifies the strength and the endurance that only homing pigeons possess. Militaries have enlisted homing pigeons as couriers for thousands of years. One of the earliest documented occasions is of Julius Caesar, using them to carry messages during his conquest of Gaul in 58 to 51 BC. His pigeon handlers might have attached a message, as in this engraving, either to a tail feather or wrapped around a pigeon's leg. Homing pigeons were especially helpful during sieges, when a city was surrounded by the enemy and all communications cut. During the siege of Paris from 1870 to 71, pigeons floated out of the city via balloon to a temporary government 130 miles away in Tours, where they were outfitted with messages and released to fly back. In this image, the green crates hold the birds being carried to the balloons. Because microphotography had been developed, messages in tour were reduced to tiny bits of text, which were rolled up and inserted into a bird quill, and then the quill tied onto a tail feather. 150,000 official dispatches and 1 million private messages were delivered by pigeon couriers to Paris. And in doing so, these birds also delivered a lot of hope. The enormous and unexpected success of pigeon couriers in the siege prompted many European militaries to include them in their ranks. By the end of the 1880s, a spider web of pigeon messenger routes crisscrossed Europe. Every line that you see on this map represents a pigeon route. There, Austria, even in Russia. Some even stretch across the water, as you can see here from the coast of Spain to the Balearic Islands, and from Italy to Sardinia. The buildup of pigeon forces in Europe did not go unnoticed in the United States. Both the Army and Navy began to experiment with pigeon couriers. The Navy in particular was interested because out at sea, it relied on flags, whistles, horn, and gun signaling during the day and flashing lights at night. But clearly, ships had to be within hearing and sight range for these kinds of communication to work. Henri Marion, a pigeon expert and a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, standing here in the back, believed strongly that with homing pigeons, ships could communicate beyond the line of sight. This was a phenomenon unheard of in our Navy. In 1891, he set out to convince the U.S. Navy Department to fund a pigeon messenger service. With a few birds left over from an Army loft down in Key West, Professor Marion built a pigeon cote or house at the top of the Academy's rigging loft, right here to the right of the boathouse. To demonstrate their ability to fly over water, Marion spearheaded a series of experiments, taking pigeons out to sea on Academy vessels, then releasing them to fly back to their boathouse loft. One of these vessels was the mighty USS Constellation, a sloop of war that had patrolled the world and was now outfitted to train naval cadets. For a few summers, she carried a pigeon cote on her spar deck. It perched on top of the capstan, as shown here, and held a dozen or so birds while out at sea. I'm not quite sure what happened when the capstan was turned to weigh anchor, but surely the sailors placed the cote down on the deck. After 5 years of successful trials, the Navy Department agreed in 1896 to fund 6 lofts on the east and west coasts of the United States. This was a far cry from the 20 that Marion had initially proposed, but it was a start. The lofts look similar to this one at the Portsmouth Navy Yard, all the same size and painted red and white stripes, which the pigeons could easily see from the air. Slightly different, but bearing the same shape and stripes, this is a loft built on the West Coast at Mare Island Navy Base, right near San Francisco. While the Navy lofts were being built and pigeons bought and trained, Professor Marion patented this message holder, the first to attach to a pigeon's leg. You can imagine how much more secure a message would be as opposed to tying it to a feather or a leg. This capsule became the prototype for the modern pigeon message holder. Professor Marion had no idea how important his design would be. Just as the naval pigeon messenger service was getting started, we entered a war with Spain to free Cuba and the Philippines from Spanish rule. You may recall this battleship, the USS Maine, that blew up mysteriously in February of 1898 in Havana Harbor, contributing to the outbreak of the war in April. Pigeons did carry messages in this war from ships off both coasts of the United States, but documentation is spotty and their use seemed to remain mostly experimental. Then in 1901, an event occurred that changed how the world communicated. Guillermo Marconi sent 3 dots, Morse code for the letter S, across the Atlantic Ocean in a matter of seconds. By 1902, all new Navy ships were outfitted for wireless. The 6 pigeon cotes shuttered or retrofitted for radio stations, and the birds sold off. That was the end of the first official pigeon messenger service in this country. Henri Marion died in 1913. Well, he never realized his dream of a fully feathered pigeon messenger service. He did live long enough to witness the beginning of the rise of homing pigeons into legend. For in 1903, a new type of bird, one made of wood and cloth and powered by an engine, took to the air. Soon after, the Army and Navy trained pilots to fly these planes, and it wasn't long before homing pigeons accompanied them. Pigeons were just getting started in their service to the military. Homing pigeons were especially valuable in World War I because the signal corps communication technology was not very functional in trench warfare. Telegraph wires were cut or trampled, and when signalmen rose from a trench to repair them, they were shot down. Radios were unreliable and could be intercepted, and the pitted, ruined terrain made travel harrowing for human and dog couriers. Homing pigeons got their messages through. About 600 birds were in the Signal Corps' American Pigeon Service. This is a photo of a mobile pigeon loft that stayed to the rear lines where the pigeons were raised and trained. When troops moved, the lofts moved with them. Pigeons were carried from their lofts to the front in baskets on the backs of soldiers and Marines, as in this photo, or on the backs of horses, mules, and dogs. This Airedale is crossing a stream with a basket of pigeons on its back. In this photo, soldiers in a trench have attached a message to a pigeon and they're about to release it. So think of it, weighing in as around as much as a large apple. Pigeons flew through exploding shells, gunfire, gas, and smoke, hardly wavering even when mortally wounded. This is the war where pigeons became heroes. Pigeoneer J.L. Carney said of the Argonne Forest battle, "Nothing could live above ground, and the trenches and shell holes were filled with dead and wounded. Time after time, the attack was on, and almost as often repulsed. Division after division was thrown into the line to face the most deadly of modern weapons, the machine gun. With small artillery firing incessantly, high explosive shells dropping everywhere, and the gas attacks on hourly, there was little wonder that man-made lines of communication should wither and break. Into the breach went the racing pigeon, the most gallant bird the world knows. And they came through with messages of weal and woe, came through when shattered troops were crying for aid, when every other line of communication had failed." The best parts of my chronicle of war pigeons are the thrilling and poignant stories of these gallant birds, serving alongside our soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines. Along with machine guns, tanks were a new formidable weapon in World War I. But its noisy, cumbersome crawl didn't affect the pigeons that went along as crew. Here, A tanker on the Western Front is releasing an Allied bird out a small window at the side of the tank. While the Army and Marines fought the war on land, the US Navy flew scouting missions from bases on the coasts of France and Italy. With very little training and only a compass to guide them, Navy pilots like Maynor, Erlen H. Parker from Farmington, flew rickety biplanes over the ocean looking for German submarines and ships. No pilot left without a couple of homing pigeons, which were sent back for help should a plane ditch into the ocean. Hundreds of downed airmen were saved by these remarkable couriers. Parker spoke of another use of his birds when fog was encountered. Out of sight of land, with a compass whirling like a top, he said, we would release the pigeons. Of course, you couldn't follow them in a fog, but you could see them circle and rise and then straight line it for land. That's all we needed to know, the direction of land. Otherwise, a lot of us would have been lost at sea. I don't want to leave World War I without mentioning Kaiser. He was a German pigeon captured by American forces in 1918 toward the end of the war. Kaiser was a big, handsome bird, as you can see. He was brought back to the States along with 21 other feathered POWs and installed at the Signal Corps Pigeon Center at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. He was issued comfortable quarters, as well as a mate, and encouraged to breed more war pigeons. By the 1930s, Kaiser was the last surviving captured German pigeon in American custody, and despite his age, his offspring proved to be champion racers. Some flew in World War II, but this time for the Allies. On February 27, 1948, Kaiser turned 31. The children at the fort held a birthday party for him, with Kaiser appearing as the guest of honor. That August, he was given membership in the American Legion's 1st Retread Post number 667 in Los Angeles on account of his service in 2 wars. On January 20th, 1949, he traveled to Washington, D.C. to celebrate the inauguration of Harry S. Truman, joined by 2 other hero pigeons as part of his Signal Corps exhibition. And then, on Halloween night that year, Kaiser passed away at Fort Monmouth at age 32. He outlived his namesake, Wilhelm Kaiser, by several years, as well as many wives. His bloodline provided the Army with strong war pigeons, and the progeny of his great-great-great-great-grandchildren, sold to the public when the Army dissolved the pigeon service, remain in lofts across the United States today, no doubt producing racing champions. Pigeons were so successful as couriers in World War I that after the war, both the Army and Navy established large breeding and training centers for birds and pigeoneers, their handlers. The Army established their center at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and the Navy at Naval Air Station Anacostia in DC. This is Chief Quartermaster Henry Kubak, in charge of the training at Anacostia. On this day, he's releasing birds from the Potomac River to fly back to their lofts at the base. Pigeons were also released from planes as part of their training. A pilot had to be extremely careful about how and when a bird was let go. It had to be out of the way of the propeller and away from the airflow that might suck the bird into the fuselage or against a wing. Back at their loft, after a training run, the pigeons received royal treatment. Here, they enjoy a bath outside. Inside a loft, the birds had electricity and running water, and at night, armed guards patrolled the grounds. A special hospital took care of any avian concerns. Only the most cosseted racehorses received care equal to that of the Anacostia homing pigeons. In the 1920s and 30s, military homing pigeons also flew for other government entities, including the U.S. Geological Survey, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Civilian Conservation Corps. They were flying everywhere. Not 30 years after the war to end all wars, homing pigeons were called up again to serve with our military. Despite huge advances in communications technology, homing pigeons were relied upon for backup. About 54,000 were trained in this country, with 36,000 deployed. World War II was fought on 4 continents, and homing pigeons flew with the Army at every front. They carried messages across deserts, over snowy mountaintops, through jungles, and across large expanses of ocean. Here, birds are exercising from aloft in Fuda Pass, Italy. In this photo, a mobile loft, also in Italy, has been dug into the ground and camouflaged. Maybe the enemy couldn't spot the loft, but the pigeons never fail to find it. This is a photograph of an actual message carried by Gustav, a British pigeon that carried a war correspondent dispatch from the D-Day landings in June of 1944. Gustav was taken across the channel on a landing ship and released by the news correspondent Montague Taylor. Gustav traveled the 150 miles to his Royal Air Force loft in 5 hours, 16 minutes in a 30-mile-per-hour headwind. Due to radio silence, his message was the first word of the invasion to reach Britain. It says, "We are just 20 miles or so off the beaches. First assault troops landed 0750. Signal says no interference from enemy gunfire on beach. Steaming steadily in formation. Lightnings, typhoons, fortresses, which were planes, crossing since 0545. No enemy aircraft seen." And Gustav was liberated at 0830. And I wanted to put this up on a slide also to show you a typical pigeon message form where the message was written in the center and the signature and time. For the first time in World War II, pigeons parachuted out of planes, sometimes by themselves, floating to the ground in a small crate, or with a paratrooper, as shown here. You can see the pigeon resting safely in a specially made vest strapped onto the soldier's chest. This type of vest was developed by Ida Rosenthal, the founder of Maidenform Brassiers. Designing soft, close-fitting pigeon vests was hardly a stretch for her. While the Navy rarely used pigeons on planes or ships in World War II, they included them in crews of airships and free balloons that flew off both coasts of the United States, looking for enemy ships and submarines. Here, a pigeon is being released from a blimp on a training run. Again, great care had to be taken to ensure the bird flew safely away from the vessel. "Launching the pigeons while aloft was no easy feat," said a blimp pilot at Moffett Field, California. To clear the prop wash of the blimp, a crewman held the bird's wings down and then threw the critter from a cabin window, much in the same manner as throwing a football. And in this photo, men who have landed in a free balloon sent up from Naval Air Station Lakehurst, New Jersey, are releasing a pigeon to fly back to base with the location of their landing so they can be picked up. In World War II, Waves began to train homing pigeons at naval air stations in the US so that male pigeoneers could deploy. Joy Bright Hancock, one of the founders of the Waves, set criteria for being a pigeon trainer. Quote, she should be a volunteer for the training, experienced in working with animals, and be able to drive a car in order to retrieve a pigeon in training status who had lost its way. She should be able to learn diseases of birds, their treatment, as well as their care. And as always, typing experience is desirable. In this photo, a wave at a base in Santa Ana, California, is inspecting the feathers of a potential warbird. During World War II, every state had a civil defense council that remained prepared in the event of an attack on the home front. Here, a member of the Lansing, Michigan Civil Defense Council is releasing a pigeon as part of a communications drill. Pigeons also flew with other defense organizations, including the Civil Air Patrol and state guards. This photo, also from the Lansing Civil Defense Council, shows how a modern messenger capsule, after Professor Marion's design, attaches to a pigeon's leg. When we entered the Korean War in 1950, radios were the Army's mainstay of communications. However, homing pigeons yet again formed the backup plan, flying messages over difficult terrain and when other communications were useless. Some pigeons in Korea went on covert missions, parachuting with intelligence officers behind North Korean lines. Despite cold weather, the pigeons in this photo are exercising and enjoying the view from a mobile loft in South Korea. I'm going to finish by talking a little bit about G.I. Joe, one of America's most famous warbirds. In World War II, he flew for the Allies in Italy. An air attack had been planned to subdue German presence in the village of Colvivecchia, but the 56th London Infantry had advanced quickly and already secured the village. With the air attack about to commence, the infantry was in danger of being bombed by friendly fire. G.I. Joe was hurriedly released with a message to call off the attack. He flew the 20 miles in 20 minutes, reaching Allied lines just as the bombers were revving their engines. His swift flight saved the lives of at least 100 Allied soldiers and many civilians. After the war, G.I. Joe returned to Fort Monmouth, where he retired to the exclusive Churchill loft, meant only for heroes. In 1946, he flew to London by plane, where he was awarded the Dickon Medal, Great Britain's Victoria Cross for animals. Between 1943 and 1949, the Dickon Medal was awarded to 54 animals, 32 of them pigeons. G.I. Joe is the only American pigeon to have that honor. And here he is, being held in London by an official with the medal around his neck. In 1955, a young pigeoneer named Tommy Derosa was stationed at Fort Monmouth and cared for G.I. Joe amongst other pigeons. In this photo, Tommy is holding the famous bird in front of the Churchill loft. In 1957, the pigeon and breeding program at Fort Monmouth was closed, and most of the pigeons sold off at auction. Writing later in the Army Communicator, Major Ron Frank described the event. Fort Monmouth looked like a Rolling Stones concert. Pigeon lovers and breeders started to arrive at 2 a.m. to purchase the 1,018 birds that were to be sold. At $5 a pair, a person was allowed to purchase 1 to 5 pairs. All the birds were sold by 11:43 a.m., and hundreds of bird fanciers went home without so much as a feather. The heroes from Churchill Loft went to zoos around the country. G.I. Joe and his mate were welcomed at the Detroit Zoo, where Joe lived until the ripe old age of 18. But G.I. Joe's story didn't end in Detroit. On November 15th, 2019, at the Rayburn House on Capitol Hill, the newly established Animals in War and Peace Bravery Medals were presented to honor American war animals. 2 living dogs received medals, while 3 more dogs, 2 pigeons, and 1 horse received them posthumously. 64 years after serving at Fort Monmouth, Tommy Derosa was there to receive the medal for G.I. Joe. And here he is standing to Joe with the new medal. I got to meet Tommy a couple of years ago in Connecticut, where he lives and still raises and races homing pigeons. I asked him about G.I. Joe and his heroic flight in Italy. Tommy said G.I. Joe was a good bird, but that any other well-trained pigeon could have made that flight that fast. G.I. Joe just wanted to get home. I'll end there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Sorry. We have a question. Are homing pigeons the same as carrier pigeons? And what about passenger pigeons? What's the difference between those?
Right. Well, I'll start with the difference between homing pigeons and carrier pigeons. So they are 2 different breeds, and they're often mixed up. But carrier pigeons is a misnomer. Carrier pigeons are an English breed of pigeon, and it's a fancy bird. It's bred just for show. They have never, ever carried a message in their whole existence. But people, I think, over the years have just started to call homing pigeons carrier pigeons because they carried messages, but they are not the same bird. And the passenger pigeon is a completely different species of bird. It's more closely related to a dove, a ground dove that lives in the western part of our country. And it is native. It was native to North America, where these pigeons of the species Columba livia come from the Middle East and Europe.
Thanks. This is I guess, a comment from one of our listeners who first learned about the use of pigeons in a book called The Long Flight Home.
Yes.
And she loved that it started in Maine and was really looking forward to your talk this evening. So do you know about that book, Long Flight Home?
I know about it. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list of books to get. So I do know about it, and I've heard it's very good.
And could you tell us some about how you became interested in the topic and how you did your research and found all the photos?
Yes, sure. I became interested in writing about this book while I was doing research for that young adult book on women spies. And I came across an article about how before World War I, pigeons were, a fellow in Germany was strapping cameras onto the chests of pigeons. And they were experimenting with sending them out to do reconnaissance work over a certain area of land. And then the little camera would snap pictures on its own. And then when the bird got home, they would then see what was on the film. And so they were sort of used as spies. And I couldn't imagine that, something this big could fly that fast home with this thing hanging on its chest. And so I just started to read more and more about homing pigeons and just became more and more fascinated by their abilities and their extraordinary skills.
Leslie is asking, I think she may have read your book at Heart's Pass.
Yes.
Or
Okay.
and how do pigeons factor into that book that takes place in
Well,
the Middle East?
yeah. So the book starts off with a Pakistani who's associated with an extremist Islam group, going up on his roof and getting a covert message from a pigeon that has been sent from um, the extremist group's hiding place up north. And he is now going to take action having read the message. And so in that novel, they play kind of a covert role in the transmission of information from one sect of the extremists to another down the line.
And I guess I missed the end of her question was, are they still being used in any missions around the world today, military or?
Well, we don't really know. Maybe they were used as recently, I believe it was 2012. They were used over in Jordan. Someone found out that a message was being secretly sent over there. And also in 2011, there were some articles written about the Chinese Air Force. And it said they are currently, right now, building up their force of pigeons, as opposed to so many other countries which don't have them. France is the only Western country left that has a military pigeon force, and they don't really use them except for show right now. But they're the only Western country left that actually has a military loft. China has been building up its forces according to these articles, and they believe that they will be valuable in the event that there's a breakdown of other communications. So they got thousands and thousands of them.
Wow, I was just reading this morning in the New York Times, and maybe it caught my eye because we were going to be doing this talk this evening about pigeons being used to smuggle diamonds out of
Yes,
mines in South
I
Africa.
saw
So,
that.
yeah. And
I
then,
saw that, which is kind of a nefarious use of them, but that's not new. I read about that a while ago, and I saw that, also. And yeah,
but I felt bad because in that case, the pigeons were being targeted
I know.
and
Yeah, I know.
shot
I know.
at. But
Mhm.
so we have another question here. Can you elaborate more on the training process for the pigeons?
Sure. So in the military, they would be trained at first here. And first they would train them to fly just to a stationary loft, just to their home loft. And when you train a pigeon, you take it out just maybe a half mile away, and then you let it go. And of course, they have superb eyesight. They have superb smell and superb hearing. So, along with their ability to form, um, along with their internal compass, they can form with all these other senses kind of a map. But at a half mile, they can just see home. So then once they get used to flying a half a mile away, then they're taken a mile away, and so on and so on and so on. And they learn how to make this map. Um, Once they were trained to fly to a stationary loft, then the soldiers, the handlers, would then take them and start training them to fly to a mobile loft, because of course that would be their home when they went out on a battlefield. So they again would just move the loft a little bit away, and then the pigeon could see it, and they would keep moving the loft farther and farther away from its original spot until the pigeon got used to figuring out how to find a loft that was moving around. And this was very important because on the battlefield, sometimes while a pigeon was out on a mission, the loft behind the lines suddenly would have to move. The troops would move, and the pigeon would finish, would get its message and fly home, and its loft would be gone. No more home. So they were bred for their intelligence more actually than their speed, because they didn't want the bird to panic and go, okay, well, I guess I'll go somewhere else. So the bird would then not panic, but would fly around, and eventually find its loft, even though it had been moved while it was out carrying a message. It's very impressive.
Well, just flipping through the book, that your book, it's so detailed. You have, so in addition to the photos, reports and everything, can you tell us what your most useful piece of research or research source was?
Yes. I think it would be really the same with many authors who write nonfiction books. The most valuable source of information for us are, of course, the actual words of the people, actual photographs. For example, the photograph I was able to get of Erlon Parker, the pilot from Maine, I just bumped into a blog by his grandson, who last Memorial Day just posted this story about his grandfather, and his words about the homing pigeon. I wasn't able, of course, to travel over to Europe to see some of these places. So the next best thing were the actual words of the pigeoneers, and I was able to access a diary of a World War II pigeoneer who worked in Europe, and I was able to read two memoirs of pigeoneers, one who had also been in Europe and the other in North Africa, where pigeons were used a lot. So between blogs from relatives and actual diaries and the actual words, those proved to be my most valuable sources. And of course, my very favorite source was Tommy Derosa, whom I got to actually meet. And if you can meet these people, it brings the story alive.
Does anyone else have any questions for Elizabeth? Let me know. I don't think I've missed anything here. What are you working on now? Are you working on any new writing or?
Well, so now I've been asked to go back and do a sequel to the novel Reckoning at Heart's Pass, and I sort of let that go a little bit while I was doing research and writing this book. So I think I'm going to return to that, and we'll come up with another covert mission, maybe with homing pigeons, and they'll be in the book somewhere.
Oh, good.
So that's what I think I'll do next.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we want to thank you so much for sharing this wonderful story. Something I definitely knew nothing about. So I'm anxious to read through the book and find out more. And we want to thank everyone else for tuning in this evening. If you want to listen in again, we are recording this program, or if any of your friends missed it and you want to tell them about it, we'll have it up on our website in a couple of days. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
And
Good
thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Oh, you're very welcome.
That was very interesting.
Good. I hope some of the attendees will never look at a pigeon the same way again.
I had no idea they were so intelligent. You know, when you sort of see them, and we don't see homing pigeons probably in a park, right? The pigeons we are used to seeing, I don't know, are not carrying messages, I guess, but they don't.
No, but they are either. So the pigeons you see in a park or lined up on a rooftop, they are either AWOL, racing pigeons, or the children of racing pigeons, or they are the descendants of warbirds. So they're not flying rats. No.
Oh, no.
No. And they're veterans. They're the descendants of veterans. And as I said earlier, I'm so pleased to be able to honor them with this book.
I think that veterans, and we've discussed this a little before, are going to be really interested in discovering this book. And it's fairly new. So as time goes on, I imagine that you're going to be asked to come to a lot of VFW halls and other, as the world opens up for in-person speeches.
Yes, I've been told to go and speak to VFW groups, but of course I can't right now, but maybe by the fall or next year, I'll be able to. Yeah, I would love to do that.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Oh, a really, really long time. way longer than it should have. I don't know. There was just so much research involved in it. And, I found when I got the book done, I don't know if other authors have told you this, I found that I would like to have added all this other stuff. It's funny when you get, so when I put together the slideshow, I had to search for photos, and I used some from the book, but I found others. And I found others that I had been searching for to put in the book and never found. For example, on Henri Marion, the professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, I looked for a photograph of him for 5 years. Wow. Nothing. I contacted the French embassy in Boston to try and help me. I can't tell you where I tried to get a photo. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And either he didn't like to have his picture taken. I don't know what his issue was. And so I couldn't include one in the book. So the book came out at the end of this past October. What do I bump into the next month, November? That photograph. It was amazing. And I just thought, no. So, and I found lots of other photos that I just, did not bump into, that I, for my talk, that I would love to put into the book. So one of the things I thought I'd do is email the editor and ask if there's a chance, if there's ever a second printing, should I sell 5 million copies? And I could put, all these other photographs in. but at least I've got them for the talk.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I have heard other authors talk about this very thing,
Have you?
about when the end is, because if you're really passionate about researching a subject area, you do continue to learn about it.
Yeah.
But then there's the whole world of publishing and deadlines and your next, what
Yeah.
you're being
And
asked to do next, etc.
I think the pandemic year probably slowed things down or rushed things at the end a little bit. And, there were some things that I would have asked to have changed in the book that I just didn't have time. So I don't think it was probably the greatest year to publish a book, but it was on the schedule, and I didn't have any choice. But finding 2 or 3 photographs that next month really just about did me in.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Although people have more time to read, so that's one
Yeah.
good thing. But the publicity is definitely harder, not being able to, go to a
It's very
bookstore, sell,
mhm.
find
And
books and everything. And
I'm not a big social media person. So it's been, I've tried, but it's not my forte. And the other thing I've been doing that I think I've heard other authors, at least of nonfiction, are doing is they're really writing articles targeted at the audience that might be interested in their book. So I've been doing that. Like I wrote an article about one of the things I learned was that at the turn of the last century, a lot of country doctors used homing pigeons as flying nurses. And so I've written an article for History Magazine about that.
Wow.
So, yeah. They, they would go out into the country and they didn't have phones out there. And in order to keep abreast of a situation, they would leave a couple of birds at the sick person's home and then ask the family to take the person's temperature and so on, and then send the bird back to the doctor's office with the information. It was very helpful, very helpful.
That's fascinating. Well,
yeah.
As things like that relate to this talk in some way, get as in the overall history of the pigeons, as those get published. So when the History Magazine article comes out, will you let us know? Because that's something that we can put something on social media with a link to the recording of this talk, for instance.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we like to keep.
Dr. Gould was a family practitioner right up in Rockland, and he took pigeons out to Matinicus and Creehaven and left his birds out there. Because the poor guy, it's 20 miles offshore, and he would get stuck out in Creehaven for 2 weeks because of the storms and everything, and he couldn't get back to Rockland and tend to his practice there. So he bought a flock of homing pigeons. I think the end of the 1800s, or 1901, 1902. And by then, of course, the Navy had trained them to fly over water. People knew how to train them to fly over water. So he would take them out to those islands. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing, really. It's all the different parts of our lives that pigeons were a part of back then. But I'll let you know. I think it's coming out, in the spring soon.
Great. Good.
Nice. It's amazing.
It is. It's
little.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me curious. Like you could even write something not as a fiction about the pandemic. And people figuring out a use for the pigeons for communication, as we've all been so isolated. Maybe the great grandchildren of the veteran pigeons that lived with the family.
Um, People who keep pigeons, I've heard that they're ready with their flocks of highly trained birds. Should we need them again, they're there and they're ready. So
Right.
I think that's good to know. And they, some of them, I think, are aware that there might be a situation where, like in China, where our communications might be break down, or there's a disaster of some kind.
Right.
They're
Wow.
out there.
Hmm. Well, I wonder, yeah, if they're being used for some of the countries where, your phones are being tapped and your internet's being monitored and
Exactly.
yeah, things like that.
Exactly. You can't intercept them, and if you capture one, they don't talk.
Right.
So, so they're really a low tech answer to a communications system that's not available to everybody. So we'll see. They're out
Right.
there.
Hopefully we don't have a total breakdown of the
No,
communication system, but
no.
we easily could after like what happened in Texas or whatever this.
Well, I know. I was wondering, actually, when that happened in Texas, I was wondering if anyone was using them. In 1919, I think there was a horrible flood or hurricane or something in Corpus Christi. And the army, it was right after World War I, and the army loaded their trains up with homing pigeons, and homing pigeons were the first, brought the first news from isolated people about how things were, what the situation was. So they are certainly have been used in emergencies. And in the great hurricane of 1938, Worcester, no, maybe Worcester, Massachusetts, they were using them.
Wow.
Not Worcester, maybe.
Was
Yeah,
it?
maybe Worcester,
Yeah, I
near
think like
Worcester.
Providence. Wasn't that storm that year?
They used pigeons then, as late as 1938.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and with cyber warfare and the potential for cyber attacks, it's good to have them around.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'll let you know about the article.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And we'll let you know when the recording is live so that you can have it and share it with people if you wish. And
Yeah, I'd like.
it'll be on our website. People can
Okay.
access it on the authors at the library page of the website, and also just straight on the YouTube channel for the library.
Okay. Oh, that'd be great. How do you think the little squares on the side? Do you think that went okay?
I do. I think you looked very professional as you were presenting, and it was really nice to be able to see the images that you were sharing. And my audio of both of you speaking, Catherine and Elizabeth, sounded good. So
Okay.
yeah, and I thought people wrote some notes in the chat saying thank you with exclamation points,
Right.
etc. So that's
Good.
always good.
Yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting talk, one person says. And
Oh, good. Good. That's good to hear. Well, yeah.
So I think it worked out well. And you have some more talks coming up, right?
I do. Yeah, I've got one actually tomorrow, and then nothing really in March, but I think one in April. And I noticed that the World War I museum is down in, where's that? The World War II museum's New Orleans. World War I is over in Missouri, I think. They are, they do some Zoom talks. So I was thinking, why not contact them
Oh
and
yeah,
maybe they'd be interested in this talk.
I think so. Yeah. I
Mhm.
grew up in a military family. Both my father and my mother's father were in the Army.
Wow.
And my grandfather lived well into his 90s. He was almost 97 when he died. But so he was retired for almost longer than he was on active duty.
Oh,
But he was so curious. He read a lot, but he would have loved this talk. He would have had been peppering you with questions,
yeah.
I think. So I've tried not to pepper you with too many questions, but
Oh, I
it's a
could
really
talk all
interesting
night.
topic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
I mean,
I
I
could.
just love the little parachute
Oh, I
thing
know.
and
I
everything, the
have
little,
Rosenthal. I know. I know. I know she had already been making silk parachutes for the war. So they asked her, and her pattern is at the Smithsonian. You can access it, but I couldn't get. I'd have to pay in order to use it. So
mm,
I didn't put the pattern up because they charge a lot. But you can actually look at her pattern of the
wow.
pigeon vest. Mm, yeah.
And the woman who was the brassiere designer,
Yeah, Ida
um,
Rosenthal. Mm,
amazing.
mhm.
That whole piece of the story is really interesting.
Yeah, yes, yep. And
And
I don't know how they knew about her or contacted her. I don't know the history of that, but um, her vest was at least one of the most used designs.
wow. Well,
I was amazed that the little birds jumped with the parachuters anyway. I was like, whoa. I mean, that amazed me.
yeah,
Or they were parachuted down in a little box by themselves.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Brave.
yeah. They
Braver
were
than,
really, they were really just an amazing creature. They are. They are. They would fly up to 60 miles an hour. They trained them for up to 100 miles. 60 miles an hour
wow.
without stopping.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope you'll stay in touch with us and let us know
I will.
how your talks are going. I'll be interested to hear if you're going to do something for the World War One museum.
Yeah, I thought I would. I was sending the bookstore owner. Actually, I spoke to her on the phone in case they wanted to. Again, COVID hasn't allowed us to. A lot of these museums are closed. And so one of the things I've been doing is trying to find out the name of the owner of the museum shop at the museums that are open and encourage them to buy a book. And so I was at their site and talking to the woman at the store, and she said, "Oh yeah, email this person and see if you can get on the speaker list."
Great.
But I'd say about at least half of the museums or historical societies that I've spoken to are closed. I'm going to go down to Cape Cod or via Zoom and speak at the Marconi Maritime Museum. It's a center because after all, it was Marconi who shut these birds down.
Hmm.
So I'm going to speak there. I'm going to do the same sort of slideshow, but I'm going to do a little more with radio, and it's going to be called Radio v. Pigeon or Radio v. Feathers, something like that.
That's terrific.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Well, um, it's fun, and I'm excited to keep going.
That's terrific. Well, thank you for
Thank you.
introducing the book to us and for coming to us to talk about it.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks again for having me, and I'll stay in touch.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds great.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.